Alright, so first off, I just want to get a grasp of how familiar you guys are with my subject. So, how many people, by raise of hands, know what UFC is? Okay, so how many of you think that the UFC is a sport? Okay, if you're raising your hand, you are all completely wrong. So, saying UFC is a sport is the same thing as saying, like, the NFL or NBA is a sport. UFC is the promotion for the sport of MMA or mixed martial arts. So, now that I'm a little bit aware of how much you guys know, you also might think that MMA or just combat sports in general could be just completely unregulated systems where people just get to go and fight and do whatever they want to each other. And in the beginning, it was that. There was one rule, which was no biting, but besides that, anything was good. I could punch you, I could kick you in the balls or in the head when you're on the ground, anything. But as time went on, thankfully, it became more regulated and more rules were created. And now there's essentially not too many issues, except for the one thing of weight cutting. So this happens in virtually all combat sports because there are weight classes. So it makes sense that if you can decrease your weight, you can have a physical advantage over someone else. So I'm going to go into what weight cutting is, the strategies that you can do to weight cut, and the possible dangers and benefits of it. So a December 2012 study by the Journal of International Society of Sports Nutrition said that 50% of combat athletes do rapid weight loss. So any sport or any combat sport, wrestling, taekwondo, judo, anything like that, and then 60% to 90% of high school, college, or international wrestling participate in rapid weight loss. And that is just a staggering amount. There's maybe out of this room, if we all wrestled, maybe 3 people wouldn't do that. So you might be thinking, like, if you're losing all that weight, it could be very bad for your health, which studies show it is, and you might be wondering, does it actually help? So this same study said that wrestlers who lost more weight and ignored the minimum requirements for weight cutting did better, and there's a high percentage of medalists. So it can show that in some cases, regardless of health, it can actually lead to success. A 2018 study by the Public Library of Science showed that, or did a study where they looked at 5 athletes of Taekwondo, and they had them lose 5% of their body weight, and then had a 16-hour recovery time before doing a mock competition. So this showed that it did not reduce physiological parameters like oxygen intake. And the study did not find that the effect of, or the one issue with this is that they analyzed it for a single weight cut. But in a real season, you would be constantly weight cutting and then gaining back and weight cutting and gaining back. So that's not, it showed it for a single event. And it was also a very small sample of only 5 people. And 5% body weight might sound like a lot, and it is, but there have been records of people losing on average up to 10% of their body weight just for the day before the event. So now there's 2 studies that kind of describe what weight cut is and how it can be beneficial. Now I'm going to tell you guys what actual strategy of weight cutting are. So November 2015 article from the Current Sports Medicine report said that the main way to cut weight is to reduce your food and fluid intake as well as sweating, and you're essentially getting rid of all the liquid from your body, which, if you guys don't know, that is not a healthy thing to do, and it's not very good because your body needs water, and you're taking all that away. So several common ways that people can do this and cut weight is through the use of a sweatsuit, a sauna, vomiting, laxatives, and they're just very dangerous in general cases because these people are going to the extreme limits and pushing their bodies. Like, they are losing roughly like 5 to 10 pounds just in hydration weight, which is, again, not very healthy. So now we know that some of the techniques are used, but how often are they used? September 2019 article from the International Journal of Sport Nutrition showed that they interviewed several coaches regarding weight cutting. 90% of the coaches said they supervised the weight cut, which is probably a good thing, and 92% recommended gradual weight cutting, which is also a good thing because losing weight over time is much better on the body than within a 24-hour period. It also showed that 80% recommended increased activity and dehydration to lose weight. 50% recommend using sweatsuits. 27% recommended training in a hot room. 26% recommended using a sauna. And 28% recommend just spitting. That is something that is actually very often done. You just get a water bottle and you spit in it until it's all full. And a water bottle full of spit is decently heavy, and that's all weight coming out of you, so it can help. So now you may be asking, this sounds pretty terrible, not fun, not safe, so why would people do this? So a 2013 article from the Journal of Athletic Training showed that, or they interviewed 14 Swedish athletes from different backgrounds of wrestling, judo, and taekwondo. And they just asked them questions. They essentially interviewed them. And they showed that weight cutting is deeply rooted in the culture of combat sports, and it's not going to be something that can be taken away super easily. It also has been shown to provide some mental advantages, like a sense of control, and it even can boost their confidence. One of the people said that when they were cutting weight, they felt a little bit like Rocky from the movie Rocky. Like, it's just kind of motivational, seeing yourself succeed and cutting the weight is almost like the hardest part of the journey. So if you can accomplish that, then many of the combat athletes believe that the fight was the easy part. They got through what they needed to. So another important viewpoint comes from a documentary, a 2011 documentary called Jens Pulver Driven. And for those of you who don't know, Jens Pulver, he was the first ever UFC lightweight championship. And this documentary followed him many years after he was out of the UFC. And he's on a 4-fight losing streak, and he's essentially at the end of his career. And one of the questions he was asked is, why are you still doing this? You're losing, you're getting hurt. Eventually, it could happen where you take a bad shot and you are permanently damaged. And he said that fighting is all he knew. He could not go and get a regular job because he had no experience with that. Fighting was his life, and he could not do anything else. So, it's also another aspect of this, of where you kind of have to fight, is in the UFC pay. If you're a low-ranked fighter, you will get $10,000 for fighting and an extra $10,000 if you win. That sounds like a lot. You could get $20,000 in one night. But that's not considering the money you have to put into your training camp, your paying your coaches, and all that. Plus, that's assuming if you fight once a month, that's $20,000 a month. There's never been a case where that happened. On average, fighters might gain, one UFC fighter showed in an interview that he will gain about $5,000 for a fight. And the highest amount of fights someone's done in a year is 8. So that's $40,000 in a year if you're a low-ranked fighter. So you have to push yourself. You have to lose weight so you ensure that you win, and then you can become a bigger name and get more money. And that's essentially what they're forced to do. Now, some of you might be asking, this sounds bad, but how serious is it? So, several people have actually died from weight cutting. A person named Yang Jianbing, he died in 2015 from a weight cut. And this was in something called One Championship, which, like UFC, is a promotion of MMA focused in Japan. And he had taken all the water out of his body, essentially, and he had gone in a coma and had died the next day. So, this is tragic, but luckily it forced the One Championship to make a new policy where they actually test the hydration for the fighters the day before the event. And if they're not hydrated, they cannot fight. So now, kind of the more fun stuff is just looking at the difference of the weight cut and seeing how it can affect the fighters. So I'm going to start off by showing you someone who I'm sure you all know. at least are familiar with it. Alright, this is Conor McGregor. So, this is him 24 hours before a fight, and this is him the day of the fight. You can see he is extremely sucked in and has just very little body mass. And within 24 hours, a lot of that comes back. So, he gets very light, but that's not even a severe case. I just showed him because he's someone that you are likely familiar with. This is Kevin Lee. Again, this is 24 hours later. In this fight, he showed up to the weigh-ins, and he was 1 pound overweight. So that means he had an hour to lose that extra pound. And in an interview, he said he literally did not know what happened to make him lose the weight. His coaches they did their thing. He said he was in a bathtub, and they put essentially boiling water in it, because then that can suck out the sweat. But he essentially said that's all he remembered from that hour. He could not tell you what he said, what happened. And then this is one of my favorites. This is not 24 hours after, but right here, he weighs 160 pounds. Right here, he weighs 225. So he had gone through extremely dangerous weight cuts, and after 2 or 3 fights of missing weight, he had to move up. But this just kind of shows that his body was not at a natural point in that picture on the left. So now that you all know about the dangers of weight cutting, I hope that you're more informed on it and can just establish your own opinions. So, thank you.